Hello, everybody. I'm Diane McFarland, Dean of the College of Journalism and Communications, and thank you so much for coming tonight. This is the sixth in the series called Innovators, and this is a program sponsored by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation that involves some of the brightest minds in media and communications who come to our campus to engage around the future of our industries. And this week, we're very, very fortunate to have Matt Thompson with us. And he spent the day interacting with faculty and students. And tonight, he's going to be interviewed by Ann Cristiano, who is a professor of public relations and holds the Carell Chair in Public Interest Communications. Matt is deputy editor of theatlantic.com. And at The Atlantic, he oversees the company's online vertical initiatives and helps shape strategic development. He was previously at NPR, where he served as director of vertical initiatives and mischief. Now, isn't that a great title? We had him talk a little bit about what the mischief part meant earlier. Maybe Ann will engage him around that. While there, he oversaw the launch of a number of blogs, including Code Switch. A recent Neiman Reports article describes how Matt is trying to breathe life back into blogging in an effort to, quote, recapture some of the looser, voicier, more conversational structures of the early 2000s, some of which has been lost in the rise of social media and commercialized online news. He is a founder of Spark Camp, which brings together smart people around a central theme such as giving, storytelling, design, and data. He says the next camp in Baltimore later this year will focus on the future of history. I love that. Matt graduated with honors in English from Harvard in 2002. So Matt, welcome. Thanks again for coming today. And Ann, thank you for leading this discussion.
Thank you so much. Who's worked so hard on trends and such a fan of what you've done with Spark Camp. I'm really grateful for that inspiration for what you say here. You are widely regarded as a leading thinker in digital journalism and engagement on the future of media, and a blog that you started 12 years ago, Cross Market, is still as fresh and relevant as it was when you started it. I think it's also worth noting that the Atlantic itself deserves an introduction. This is, and the Atlantic, for some of you who may not know, was actually founded in 1857, and it is probably one of the foremost agenda setters in the world. But despite the fact that the magazine is over 150, am I unmuted? Okay. It's over 150 years old. It just won the Ellie Award from the National Magazine Association, so for the Magazine of the Year. So congratulations for that. It's a big deal. When I was reading about that, I thought it was really interesting that the National Magazine Association has actually been handing out awards for 50 years. And I found myself wondering how many magazines were on the dais with you that had also been around for more than 50 years. So enough about the Atlantic for now. We'll talk more about that later. But I want to go back further and say a lot of the people who are with us in this room tonight are students who are sort of nervously anticipating their own futures. And they are probably wondering, when you were their age, what kind of future were you imagining for yourself?
That's a great question. It's hard. I find that it's hard. I don't know if everyone has this experience, but I find it's really hard to sort of project myself back into my earlier frames of mind. I mean, I can remember the trepidation of graduating from college, and I can remember the not knowing exactly what was coming next, knowing what I wanted to come next, sort of ish. Knowing that I wanted to get back into journalism, understanding that by having not done the college paper, but instead sung a cappella for 4 years, that may have been difficult. But not realizing at the time that some of the things that I had learned, like when I got to college, I'd made a decision pretty early on that this was a time I will only have this experience once. Only once am I going to get 4 years to study and try to learn anything that I want to learn. To take classes on any subject that I could imagine wanting to know more about. I'm only going to get one chance to do it. And so I said, I want to make this time distinctive, and I want to do stuff during this time that I'm probably not going to be able to do after the fact. So I ended up singing a cappella for 4 years, joining an a cappella group, saying I'm probably not going to be a professional singer, and really didn't want to be a professional singer. It just seemed like drama. So I'm going to do that for 4 years, and I'm probably not going to get another chance to write 60 pages on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so I'm going to do that for a little while. And then my senior year, that was all. It was all of a sudden the end of this tremendous 4-year period. So I think if I project myself back into that time, it was a great unknown. It would be a great leap into the unknown. And it ended up working out just fine. So if you find yourself at that point, then yeah, have hope.
Was there a particular moment when it became clear that your future was in not just journalism, but really defining digital journalism?
I think it was, so my senior year, by my senior year, I had gotten into reading a lot of blogs. Blogs were big at that time in 2001, the old days. And I had, I'd already sort of been a little interested in the online universe, having had an AOL account during high school, and had a sort of proto-blog that I kept for my high school friends back in the day. But I found myself, by senior year, really returning to it. And one of the blogs that really pulled me in was Metafilter. It was this group weblog. It's still around, still a great site. But it was a place you could post, any user on the site could post one post a week if you had an account. After a while, the guy who ran the site, Matt Howie, started a policy of charging $5 for life for an account, just to sort of like weed out the interlopers, like the folks who maybe weren't serious about being Metafilter members. They would have to pay this high price of $5. So I loved Metafilter so much that I was worried that I would post, use up my post and have something else that I wanted to post or ask, and so I bought a second account after he was charging $5 for it. But it was a place where I captured for the first time since high school, and I worked on my high school paper, and we would paste the paper together. We would actually print stories out on a word processor, paste them on paper with rubber cement, and photocopy them, fold them up, and hand them to our classmates. That's how we made the paper every month. That was my first experience of working at a newspaper. And that sense, after you publish something and your classmates are reading it and everybody's talking about it, you can't recapture that. That was solid gold. I love that sense. And nothing brought me closer to it than posting, making a post on Metafilter, crafting, taking the time to pull together all of this information and crafting a post putting it online and seeing how people responded to it. And there was this sort of, I started to realize that the type of journalism that I wanted to do began when the story got to the public. It didn't end there. It wasn't that the story that you wrote was sort of the culmination of this long process of reporting, and then once you'd published it, you could sort of like wipe your hands and walk away. It was then that people started responding. And then is when the exciting part really happened. People are talking about the story. You can mix it up with them. You can talk. You can understand what questions people have. You can find new directions to take the thing that you were so interested in. The ability that online journalism afforded to do that, to make the publication of a story the starting point of a dialogue rather than the ending of one, that was very compelling.
So fast forward, you landed at one of my most favorite news organizations, NPR, and built several verticals there. But I have to ask you about Goats and Soda. Where on earth does a name like Goats and Soda come from? And what were you about trying to do that site?
So the name like Goats and Soda comes from a place like NPR, which holds things like tiny desk concerts. NPR is a delightful place. It's a place filled with ambitious, super intelligent journalists, incredibly creative people, half of whom are in bands. Once a year, there's the NPR holiday party is like basically they just set aside all the conference rooms for all the NPR employee bands to each place. So you can kind of wander from room to room and
Did you get to use your
briefly
acapella
dance.
skills?
I tried to keep them pretty on the low when I was at NPR, but. So Goats and Soda, we were trying to come up with a name. We were covering global health and development. And for a big portion of the internet consuming public, when they hear the terms global health and or global development, there's this like sort of instant soporific effect. Like it does not, it's not, people are not trying on the whole, when they're like, ooh, what does the internet have for me today? Ooh, global health. Yes, please. Click, double click. And so we wanted a way to really sort of, to bring out a few dimensions of the subject. One, that people are interesting. People are interesting all over the world. And the story of how big societies get built, how some of the most busily churning, the fastest growing corners of the world are growing, that is actually a pretty fascinating story. And we wanted to do it in a way that was both light and human and relatable. We also wanted to bring out what dimensions of the topic felt most universal. And so we lit upon these two things, and the team, this really came from the Goats and Soda team, that we assembled under the fantastic leadership of Ann Gudenkoff, NPR science editor, who's just phenomenal in all sorts of ways, and I could go on about her for hours. But they hit upon these two things that you could find almost anywhere in the world: goats and soda. And we did a little bit of a process to make sure that that name felt appropriate to all the different audiences that would experience it. That name could appear in an NPR broadcast. That name was on blog posts that would be all over the world. And so we asked people. We asked people from a variety of places. We spoke to folks at foundations. We spoke to development officers in different corners of the world where we were reporting. We spoke to people who sought grants in different corners of the world. And we said, okay, given a few different names, what does this mean to you? And by and large, when people encountered Goats and Soda, they said, that's funny, and also they're ubiquitous. Even in a little town in the upper Midwest, you are very likely to have a meal containing goats and soda. And so the name stuck.
So did that project, you had a great name, did that project achieve what you set out to achieve, which is engaging people in these big, weighty issues that are hard to get people to sometimes care about and connect with? Yeah,
I think definitely, and I think it continues to. By and large, behind any given vertical or brand or channel or product, there are people. They're often, for the things that I've had a role in building, they're often journalists, most often journalists. And so the most essential ingredient of success was not particularly the brand, not even necessarily the lens that we took to the subject, but did we have good storytellers? Did we have good journalists, reporters, empathetic reporters who were able to report in all sorts of places, in all sorts of experiences, report in West Africa at the height of the Ebola epidemic, and connect in that moment, in a moment, in one of the go back and look at some of the coverage from West Africa. NPR was sending reporters, cycling reporters in and out of West Africa all through the fall of 2014. Our first team of reporters were in West Africa in, I believe, March of that year. And if you remember how that crisis played out across that region, it really it didn't sink into attention in the US until late that year, until well on into the fall. And so how do you find people that can, in that situation, when people are dying, can find what in that story is both compelling, arresting, human, real, visceral, even dare I say, funny. We found the people that could do that, and I think they continue to do tremendous, tremendous work.
I love this recognition that you had, that there was a responsibility at NPR, not just to tell really good stories and not just to tell really important stories, but to package them in a way that people would actually crave those stories.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely a big part. I always think, my favorite journalists tend to have two engines. They're like twin engine planes. The drive to discover and the drive to share. Both are necessary, I think, to really, really do the best journalism. If you just want to learn new things and keep them to yourself, probably don't be a journalist. If you are not interested ever in learning anything new or challenging your conception of the world, probably don't be a journalist. But if you have an insatiable hunger to discover new things and to share them, then you're probably well cut out for that pathway.
So you're in this extraordinary environment where you have the opportunity to experiment and explore and try these new kinds of experiments. Why on earth would you leave? Why would you go? Why leave and go to the Atlantic?
I love NPR. And I have never found it easy to say, to leave a place. I've always been attached to the places that I've been. And so very often the question is not about leaving. The question for me is really, what do I want to be doing right now? How do I want to be spending my day? What do I most want to learn next? How do I most want to grow next? And so when I got to ask that question about staying at NPR or coming to the Atlantic, I found that the allure, the tug of a role at the Atlantic, these are two places that I've loved for a long time. I've been a fan of the Atlantic well before. Actually, when I got to DC to work at NPR, one of the first things that I did was I emailed Jim Fallows, the veteran journalist for the Atlantic, veteran correspondent, just fantastic journalist, who'd done some of my favorite stories of all time. And I emailed him and I said, I live in DC. I love your journalism. Can I buy you lunch? And he, because he is the world's most gracious human, said, sure. And we had a lovely lunch. But that was not with any thought, inkling, or expectation of ever working at the Atlantic. It was just I loved the place. So these were two places that I loved, and the role at the Atlantic offered a lot of things that really spoke to what I wanted to accomplish now.
So, and just for a little bit of context, there's a lot that Atlantic is getting right. And I think the juxtaposition of this magazine that's more than 150 years old is also one of the things that we talk about a lot in our college is getting the business model right. So Atlantic.com broke 3 consecutive audience records at the close of 2015, had 50% year-over-year digital growth, had a high of more than 31.5 million unique monthly visitors. But I thought that magazines were dead. But your total revenues across all your platforms are up 20% in 2015. And in 2015, The Atlantic increased its staff by 50% and has similar plans for growth in 2016. So you're doing this without kitten videos. And I spent a lot of time on the site and have never found any quizzes about which celebrity I most resemble. So did you guys not get the memo? What's going on?
We reserve the right to launch a kitten video or a celebrity quiz at any time, but yes, we've had it's been a tremendous, now year and a half almost at the Atlantic. It's been a great, really interesting time to be reporting on a range of topics. To have come to this team, yeah, it's been a great blessing. I think what's interesting about The Atlantic as a magazine is that uniquely among all the places that I've worked, the magazine has, I think, always sort of thought of itself as encompassing a variety of types of work. It's multivocal, I guess you might say. From its earliest days, it was publishing fiction and poetry and satire, as well as investigative journalism, explanatory journalism, strong persuasive argumentation. It is a magazine that in its 150 plus years has done a lot of has understood itself many different ways. And I think that carries through very much to today. We do a lot of different types of work. We do things that are deeply serious and that have big stakes for the public. And we try to also, all the things that journalism can do, it can inform, it can entertain, it can delight, it can connect, it can convey, it can engage people with a topic, a story, a person. It's an incredibly powerful, malleable discipline. And I think one of the things that's distinct about The Atlantic is it embraces all of that possibility of what we can do. I am delighted. I'm delighted every day by some of the things that I encounter on the site. I woke up one morning to find a story called A Major Correction. And I was worried as the deputy editor of the site. If overnight some process has taken shape such that we are running a story that is headlined A Major Correction, I was expecting that we'd discovered that one of our reporters was actually a Gorgon, and that the story had been mistakenly reported that the citizens of an entire nation had fallen into a crevice or something like that. In fact, that story was it was an article from our science, tech, and health editor, Ross Anderson. And the correction was that previously we had published a story, an argument from our reporter Adrienne LaFrance, arguing that the best planet was Uranus. And Ross wanted to put this argument to rest and say that definitively, no, the best planet was Venus. I may have the order of the planets wrong, actually. Don't fact check me on that. But that was the story. It was a delightful thing. I started reading it, and it was a way of sort of playing with our readers that I just found lovely, delightful, engaging. And something like that happens all the time on the site.
One thing that has been really clear in the discussions that we've been having today, as I've gotten to observe you having conversations with lots of different kinds of people today, is that you and your colleagues at The Atlantic are really obsessed with who your audience is, who that community of readers is. and also really self-aware of the role that The Atlantic has in being an agenda setter on issues of national and international significance. For example, this morning, one of the things you mentioned is that you really use even your cover very strategically, and I observed that on your site you've got news releases about each of your cover stories and why you chose them and the significance behind them. So can you talk a little bit about the results that you hope that's going to have, that intensive focus on audience and strategy, and how people are responding to your content?
I mean, I think I think of the role of an editor. Even if you're editing a particular story, I think when I'm editing a particular story, I think of myself as first and foremost a representative. And I'm a representative of the sources and subjects that the story contains, the people that we actually spoke to, reported on, the public, I mean, the people who are going to read this story, and the broader public, the folks who won't read this story but may be affected by it. I'm reading this story, I'm reading a story with an eye to trying to understand how might people read it, how might it affect people, and trying as much as I can to understand my own responses to it and to channel those to the reporters that I'm working with in a way that's useful, informative, clear, and helps just make the story as best as it can be. All that is to say that I think it is important to keep foremost in mind, for me it has always been important to keep foremost in mind that whatever we make, whatever stories we tell, that there are people on the other end of them. And I think that bakes in a very real way into designing a product, understanding that someone, somewhere, hopefully, if you do it right, is actually going to use this thing that you've made. And so trying to get a sense of who they are and thinking of them really when you write a story. We are not covering abstractions in the world. We are covering, most often, people, human beings, people. The reality of having sort of people in front of you, I think, is a big part of just thinking about, not only thinking about them, but doing your very best to kind of represent people in your work is important. And when we think about audiences, strategy, building products, data, analytics, traffic, a big part of what we're trying to use the data to tell us, what we're trying to find in the data, is what can we learn about what the people did? And what are our hypotheses about why they did it? And how do we make more of the things that we think are good for the world happen that way?
So on the subject of being good for the world, is your strategy around engagement, is it really about building a relationship with your readers? Is it really about building The Atlantic? Or because it seems like there's something much bigger that you're after?
I think that first and foremost, when I think about purpose and coming to work each day, and what is it that I think at its best journalism can do, and what is it that I think at its best our journalism can do, there's a part of me that goes back to that epiphany that when a story is published, something begins, that you've sprouted a seed perhaps for something. The notion of pulling people into an understanding of a topic, of opening something up for them, of engaging them with it in a way that means that they will be curious about it, that they'll follow up on it, that they might talk about it with someone, that they might forge a connection based on that information, that they might actually follow up on it, that they might read more, that they might research, that they might write into us and challenge the argument that we made. That is, I think, a big part of our purpose. I think, for me, when we enable people to engage with the world more fully in one way or another, I think that we're doing our best work. When last year, Chartbeat reported that the number one most engaging story that Chartbeat had recorded being written on the internet, being published on the internet, was Graham Wood's cover story, What ISIS Really Wants. And this is Graham Wood wrestling with a question. What does this group, this unusual group that may or may not have good historical analogs for us to learn from. What motivates it? He wrestles with that question and produced a piece that really struck a lot of people. And that was, I think, the beginning for hopefully all of the readers of that piece. That was the beginning, or maybe the midpoint even, of an engagement with a subject. Hopefully that opened up an avenue into a topic that may have been just sort of washing by. And I think that when we can do that, when we can bring people into a dialogue, that's good work.
So in a few minutes, we're going to open this up to your questions, but there are just a couple of things I want to ask about.
Absolutely.
Let them open that up. So you have a blog, Snark Market, which, as I tell you, I've been spending a lot of time on Snark Market. I'm not finding the snark.
It's the secret. It's the dirtiest secret about Snark Market is that it is secretly never snarky.
It's never snarky.
It's we're the most earnest, unsnarky people.
So
We aspire to snark.
in a recent post on Snark Market, you wrote, when you can mark the instant before and after something slips into history, just as it's happening, as rare and intensely valuable. So a dozen years ago, you and one of your colleagues had one of those moments. You said, over the course of a few weeks in early 2004, we came to realize that our then present experience of media and technology was fast becoming an anachronism, and that there were a lot of people, journalists in particular, who weren't aware of that. We imagined ourselves looking back on that era before tiny, powerful computers colonized every corner of the world, and marveling at how strange and foreign it would already seem just 10 years later. We shaped these imaginings into a rough little movie that is still one of the most popular things I've ever had a hand in making, and I credit some significant part of its resonance to the way we flipped the lens, projecting not forward from our past experience, but backward from the future. And what I love about that project was that was one of the things that really revealed you as somebody who was really thinking about what journalism could be and what the deep peril that journalism was facing. And so that project is now famous as the Epic 2014 project. And we actually have, I just want to show the last 2 minutes of that, if we could.
Sunday, March 9th, 2014, Google's on unleashes Epic. Welcome to our world. The evolving, personalized information construct is the system by which our sprawling, chaotic mediascape is filtered, ordered, and delivered. Everyone contributes now, from blog entries to phone cam images to video reports to full investigations. Many people get paid too, a tiny cut of Google's immense advertising revenue proportional to the popularity of their contributions. Epic produces a custom content package for each user using his choices, his consumption habits, his interests, his demographics, his social network to shape the product. A new generation of freelance editors has sprung up, people who sell their ability to connect, filter, and prioritize the contents of Epic. We all subscribe to many editors. Epic allows us to mix and match their choices however we like. At its best, edited for the savviest readers, Epic is a summary of the world deeper, broader, and more nuanced than anything ever available before. But at its worst, and for too many, Epic is merely a collection of trivia, much of it untrue, all of it narrow, shallow, and sensational. But Epic is what we wanted. It is what we chose. And its commercial success preempted any discussions of media and democracy or journalistic ethics. Today, in 2014, the New York Times has gone offline. In feeble protest to Google's hegemony, the Times has become a print-only newsletter for the elite and the elderly. But perhaps there was another way.
So, Matt, are you from the future?
Not at all. No more so than many commenters on media, I think, throughout the ages. Actually, I mean, one of the things that rewatching that reminds me of, 71 years ago in The Atlantic, a fellow named Vannevar Bush wrote an essay called "As We May Think," and it was. This was in sort of an interesting point of the development of computers, computer science, information sciences. And he was projecting forward from his time. And this was a story about the future in the way that Epic was a story about the future. And he imagined something very, very much like the internet. This was 1945. He said, he called it the Memex, I always thought of it as the Memex, but it's probably Memex. In it, he has one of my favorite definitions of the profession of journalism in 2016 that I've ever read. He says, painting a vision of a media future, he says, there will be a new profession of trailblazers, those who find delight in establishing useful trails through the enormous mass of the public record, which, this is a pretty good mission statement, I think. Establishing useful trails through the enormous mass of the common record. I think, he was a really good prognosticator. 71 years, got nothing on Vannevar Bush.
And so are you. And you foresaw this trivialization of news and information. And I'm wondering, did we avert that future?
I would say yes and no. Epic begins with the words, "It is the best of times. It is the worst of times."
And that is your voice, right?
That is my voice.
Okay.
And I think both of those things are true. We said in part that for some, for the savviest readers, for the people who cared most and most intentionally cultivated a media diet for themselves, they had never had access to more information from more corners of the world. They had never had access to more news, more informed perspectives on things that would have been so difficult to get an understanding of years prior. And I think that is true. We also said, at its worst, and for too many, Epic was a collection of trivia. Narrow, shallow, sensational, much of it untrue. If you don't take, one of the things I think the internet has done for us, television did before it, writing did once upon a time, is amplify a number of human abilities. And human tendencies, and amplified them in both directions. Amplified our ability to preserve, to process, to understand, and amplified our ability to fight, to misunderstand, to oversimplify. And I think that is a world in which we increasingly live. Our ability to do both has never been more robust.
So what is a College of Journalism and Communications role in helping to feed one future and avert the other?
I think the big part of this role is the most important thing. Every day, I think the two most important components of my job are my team, the members of my team, and am I helping them grow? Am I helping them develop? Am I watching out for them? Am I reading their work well? Am I doing a good job of supporting my people? And am I doing a good job of finding new people and helping and bringing them in and helping them grow as well? The people are a big part of the role, and I think for any college of journalism and communication today, I think cultivating those twin impulses in your people, in the students, taking the natural curiosity, the way that particularly students today, that all of you guys who are now in college, all of the ways that you interact with your friends, the ways that you use media, and the curiosities that those things are fueling in you, in the students, taking those and nourishing them, giving students the tools to figure out how to satisfy those curiosities, how to discover new things, and giving them the desire and the insight to always be finding new ways to share.
And what is the student's role in that? They're all listening.
I think passion is a big thing. I think that I take a lot from the fact that I pieced my college newspaper and decided to sing a cappella for 4 years because I liked singing. And I thought this was a thing that I wanted to do for 4 years. And I dove myself into that job, into the job of singing a cappella, let's be clear. That meant that when we needed a website so that we could attract people to our concerts, I learned HTML code that I never knew how to make before. I learned Flash. I taught myself, in order for us to have a hot website, I learned how to code. And that was a skill that I've used. Again, a skill that was nourished by my passion, a skill that I sought because I was passionate about this thing. I think being able to be guided by your own passions and your own curiosities and to turn those into things that are useful for the world is a fantastic skill. Pay attention to your passion. Figure out what it says about you, how you can take that passion and use it to give something important and valuable to the people around you. That, I think, is what the student's role is.
I think that's a great time to go to the questions of the people in this room.
Hello, my name is Aaron. I'm a master's student in ethnomusicology, musician, and very thankful that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
So I'm really interested in your a cappella experience. Being a musician, I apologize, I'd like to ask about that. So purposefully, have you springboarded off of that experience from the musical side to adapt into your journalism career? And can you explain that in some way that we might understand?
I would say one of the traces of the actual musical part of making the music was that I became a pretty prolific arranger. And I don't sight read. I don't write music. I play no instruments. I played the flute for like a minute in 4th grade. Was not good. And so arranging for me was this torturous, delightful process of kind of figuring out a song. So the way I would arrange, I had software. It was called Noteworthy Composer.
Maybe explain what arranger means.
Oh, so arranging a song actually means like putting the notes into a sheet of sheet music, into a musical staff, writing the musical notation of a song, like understanding each part and what they needed to sing, writing that into a place where other people could see it and then learn it and sing it. I arranged a bunch of songs. I became a really prolific arranger. And if you saw what arranging required from me, because I did not know how to write music, you would have taken such pity on my poor young soul. It meant I would listen to a song again and again in like 3-second increments. I would listen to 3 seconds for each part that I had to do. So most of my arrangements had like 8 parts, 2 sopranos, 2 altos, 2 tenor parts, 2 bass parts. And I would listen for each of those 8 parts. I would go through this song in 3-second snippets, hear what I heard, place a note in my software thing, in this music composition software, Noteworthy, hit play. Was it the right note? Was it the note I expected? Was it the duration that I wanted? If it wasn't, I would change the note and hit play again. And I would do that again and again and again in 3-second increments on repeat for 8 parts.
Oh, no.
That was coding. That was my first experience of what it was like to code, actually, to write, to program something. Writing can feel that way sometimes, and one of the things that I've learned about myself, surprisingly, is that actually I love coding. I love writing code. When I get the time to do it, it's a secret little like hobby love. I'm not good at it in the same way that I was like basically not good at arranging music. But I loved it. I loved it. And I carried that with me. I mean, that is a big part of like writing, is that precise, particularly writing and editing for a magazine, the context of a magazine. A big part of what we do is finish, polish, trying to figure out precise words, vagaries of tone that are quite nuanced and complex. There's a part of that that also feels like coding. Yeah.
Is it on? Hi, my name is Ashley Lombardo, and I am a senior journalism student.
Thanks for coming.
And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. So during the discussion, you said two of my favorite words that really stood out to me and that really resonate with me. You said empathy and connection. And I feel like those are two really important elements in public interest communications. So my question for you is, how does advocacy interact with journalism or not interact with journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that once again, there are a lot of different types of journalism. And there is journalism. There is persuasive journalism. In the days following the tragic shooting in Charleston, South Carolina last year, when 9 people died in the Emmanuel AME Church, 9 people, I believe, was the number of people that died, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an essay for The Atlantic titled, "Take Down the Confederate Flag Now." And it was a really deeply persuasive essay. It was written out of a place, I think, of deep hurt. And it was very boldly argued. It was, I mean, that title reflected the substance of the piece. It was a piece making a rich, but not particularly nuanced, pointed command to take down a flag that was a symbol of a lot. That too is a tone that we at the Atlantic, I mean, that is something that is very much central to our identity. You can call that advocacy, you can call it persuasion, but persuasive writing, persuasive journalism is also a flavor of journalism. I think in all of the work that we do, I want us to be, the word empathy, also there's a piece of it for me that is just about fairness, respect. When we wrote the ethics code at NPR, we built the ethics handbook around the 10 guiding principles that we felt drove the organization: fairness, accuracy, independence, transparency, honesty, impartiality, completeness, accountability, respect, and excellence. A lot of folks wondered, why would you put excellence in, like, why is excellence an ethical matter? And part of why it was important for us to have that in there, in addition to respect and telling the most complete story that we can tell, these things are in tension. And the ethics of doing communication of any sort, the ethics of doing journalism certainly, involves a constant tension between values that are often competing with each other. Excellence, the discipline of polishing a story to a finish, of trimming out what in it is not essential, of trying to make a story arresting, of writing a headline and a deck that feels compelling for someone to click on. That is in tension with completeness, with telling the fullest picture you possibly can. There are details that you leave on the cutting room floor when you're writing a story. And why do you do that? When that cuts against completeness, because that is in tension with excellence. And doing the work that we do is striving so often to keep these competing values that are often in tension with each other, to do your very best to strike a balance that is the very best work that you can do for the public. And I think that responsibility is as true when you're doing that responsibility to understand what your values are, where they're in tension, and to be thoughtful about how you navigate that tension is true no matter whether you're doing a straight news hit, a long investigative feature, or a piece of persuasive writing.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Great
Time
question.
for one more.
Hi, my name's Christina Manus. I was wondering, how crucial do you think blogging is for an organization in a time when most people have a very low attention span and are more interested in videos and quick and interesting tidbits more so than in-depth writing?
That's an interesting question. Very good question. I think, so having just, launched a new blog last year, which is sort of an anachronism, I don't think, it's not like, if someone were to try to hire me as a consultant and say, give us your best pitch for like what a media organization needs to be doing in 2016 to make itself relevant, I would not be like, oh, you've got to be blogging. Like, that's just where it's at. It's a price of entry into doing communications in 2016. But I also wouldn't say you've got to be Snapchatting. Like, that's the thing that you've got to do. You got to get yourself on Yik Yak. But I think often when we look at platforms and types of storytelling, ways of expressing ourselves, places, media habits even, often we're sort of looking at this vast universe of how people are interacting with the world, the many, many, many ways that people have of interacting with the world and of consuming, following, seeking information. And are saying, oh, we got to get ourselves a piece of that. I actually think that's the wrong way to look at it. There is a guy who is writing long, detailed, comprehensively reported historical features on Infocom text adventures. These are text adventure video games, most of them written in the 80s, that involve, you interact with these video games by doing things like typing the command, go west, or examine the bed on a keyboard. That's how you play these games. I loved these things when I was a kid. I will admit in public to being one of a few hundred people that pays that guy a couple bucks every time one of these long, comprehensively researched pieces appears on the internet through Patreon. Because I loved these text adventures. They were a formative part of my understanding of myself as a person who liked words. And these stories are really interesting to me. I think one of the first tasks of sort of trying to understand how do you make things for people is figuring out what you love, telling a story that even just a few people will absolutely love. If you can build up, I often talk about the tension between scale and love. Media organizations, we need both. We need both of these things, and we have always needed both of these things. Part of what gives us our authority, part of what gives us the ability to hold a mic up to a presidential candidate is the fact that we've got a big megaphone. So we need reach, we need a big audience, we need attention, we need scale. But part of what keeps us alive is that people love us, that people come back to us time and time again, that people hungrily devour everything that we post on Facebook or tweet, that there is that crowd. These two things are often in tension with one another. If you're trying to do things that pull in the world, you are often in danger of alienating the people that love you most. And at the same time, if you only focus on just the love game, you risk losing your big megaphone. So these things are in tension with one another. But I think very often when we look at media strategy, we're looking purely at the scale side of the game. How do you siphon off this fraction of the world's voluminous attention? And I think you've got to pay just as much attention to the love side of the game. Like, how do you build that newsletter by that guy who loves Infocom Text Adventures, how does he build that into a sustainable enterprise? That is a super roundabout way of asking a very, in fact, like specific question about blogging. But all that is to say, I think that there is a way, there's a universe, there are communities for which the very best way to reach those communities consistently to build both love and scale is to blog. There are communities for which the very best way to reach those people to build both love and scale is to write an email newsletter. There are probably communities for which the very best way to reach them is to get on Yik Yak. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not. But I'm going to allow for the possibility.
All right, so I'm going to steal the honor of the last question.
Of course.
Which is actually to turn one of your own questions back at you. Over on Snark Market, you asked your readers, what do you see around you today that will come to seem remarkable? So, back at you, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is my friends and I are doing an event in a month that is just all about asking that question. And so I've been thinking about these things a lot. Like, what is it that's happening right now that when we look 10 years hence is going to feel sort of astonishing or surprising? What will come to feel anachronistic? I think that, I think probably not 10 years out, but probably a bit further, I think it will be surprising to us that we thought of it, that there was a time when most pieces of information didn't link to most pieces of information, that the connections were that many connections between thoughts and ideas were kind of implicit. I think we're in the midst of this process of sort of working out how to get from one idea to another in digital contexts. And I have a feeling that the things that we're going to be discovering, and particularly as more and more of our interaction with the digital world happens through these little portals that we carry in our pockets or purses, I think that's going to feel strange. I think the notion, one of the things that already feels anachronistic, but that we never took quite the moment to eulogize, is worth settling on for a minute. It's the water cooler story. There was a day not very long ago where I reported in a newspaper in one of the most diverse cities in California. It was a city that's even more diverse than the rest of California, which was even more diverse than the rest of the country. Just the city filled with people from a lot of different places, all interacting with one another, speaking a giant stew of languages. And every day, we'd have this meeting at 2:30 to construct A1 for the next day. And this meeting was not the most diverse meeting in America. It was, shall we say, rather demographically skewed. And like, what would happen at the meeting, we'd all sit around the table, like the editors of different representatives from different sections would all be sitting around the same table. And each person would sort of report the biggest stories that they had going in their section that day. And then the next day's front page would be constructed by the editor of the paper, who would say, on A1 tomorrow in the skybox, we'll run these 3 stories, that one from Metro, that one from business, that one from sports. We'll put that talker from features in the photo lead. We'll take that great business profile and put it up as the text lead in A1. Below the fold, we'll have that feature from sports. We'll have that piece from the neighborhood section, and we'll call it a paper. That's how the paper was constructed. And the idea was that A1, the most important page of the paper, that set the dialogue for that community the next day. That people would wake up and they would be talking about the stories on that page. And there has been this complete inversion. We do not think about our engagement with the public that way any longer. The water cooler moment has died a gory death. Now, the things that people are talking about, the conversations that are happening, the ways that the public is speaking with itself about what is most important, the way that people in cities across the place you live are speaking with one another. The subjects that they're raising, the stories that they're sharing, the things that seem to obsess them, those are the beginning of our inquiry. We are often looking for the things that are missing in that conversation and trying to put them there. And we're often trying to find the things that are happening in that conversation and bring a context and a shape to them so that more people can participate. And that inversion, the fact that the world was ever the other way, I think that will come to feel deeply anachronistic.
Great answer. It's been such a pleasure spending this hour with you.
Likewise.
You've been so generous with your responses. Before we close, I want to ask my colleague, Kay Tappan, to join us.
Well, thank you, Anne, so much for your very thoughtful questions. And thank you, Matt, so much for joining
Oh,
us.
thank you so
This
much.
was you.
Oh, awesome. This is beautiful. My partner said, are you going to receive an award? I said, no, I'm going to talk to students. This is delightful. He's going to be like, you lied. Thank you so much. And thank you so much.
Matt, thank you very much.